I've done a webinar before for IHEC, and it's just great to sort of engage with everyone in this digital space. I do hope that we can engage with questions, but also potentially with sort of maybe the chat feature as well to sort of see and make sure I can tailor this presentation as much as possible to what is of interest to you all. But just to give a quick introduction, my name is James Larkus. I use pronouns he, him, his. I currently work at the University of Denver within our Integrated Health and Counseling Center, and I support all of our various initiatives and programs and services across health, our counseling center, our health promotion, which might be potentially some of the areas that you might be coming from today, our collegiate recovery community, as well as sort of our administration and our advocacy services. So it's been a pleasure to be working there. I also come to you with a different hat on as well. I also serve as an affiliate faculty member at Metropolitan State University, or MSU Denver, here in downtown Denver, where I support and train students to become certified health and wellness coaches. So I'm really, again, pleasure to be here today. And the presentation that I hope to sort of offer and have as a conversation, or at least an initial discussion point for you all, is the implications of two national white papers that have come out, and I'll give you some context and some information about both of those, but then wanted to sort of lead that into asking the question, how does this potentially impact the work that each of you and each of us are doing as on our campuses for alcohol and other drugs? So it's, again, a pleasure to have you here. And if you do, I believe, potentially have the chat feature. If you just want to throw in the chat there, kind of where you're coming from, what institution, that'd be great just to kind of see who's here with us. And I will move on to our outcomes today. So our learning outcomes. By the end of this sort of webinar or workshop, I'm hoping that you all as participants will be able to do a few of the following things. First, I hope you're able to name some key findings from the Framing Wellbeing in a College Campus Setting white paper. I hope that you will also be able to understand the core concepts of the complementary and exploratory study of emotional well-being in particular by the American College Health Foundation, ACHF, and Aetna Student Health. So these are two, like I said, major national projects that have been happening as it pertains to the idea and the growing prevalence of well-being and well-being initiatives on campus across the United States as well as in Canada. But it also is focusing on specifically our current project is on emotional well-being, as that kind of came out as a salient topical area. And we know that emotional well-being is connected to the use or prevalence of use or not use of substances on college campuses. So we'll explore both those two papers. And then at the end, we'll discuss some implications of these frameworks for your work as AOD professionals. So that's our goal that we hope to accomplish today. All right, just this kind of goes over the same thing, but here are sort of the agenda for today. We're going to go over these three areas: the first paper, the second paper, and the discussion. But what I wanted to do is to share a little bit about kind of more about what this presentation will be about. So this presentation will outline the core findings of that Framing Wellbeing in a College Campus Setting paper. This was an investigatory study sought to explore the range and variation of well-being initiatives on select cross-section of college campuses across the United States and Canada. This first white paper sought to highlight innovative practices that may inspire other institutions to consider new ways of promoting well-being for both students and employees. In addition, participants will be exposed to the second additive study focusing on the development of a new online survey tool or sort of research tool to measure emotional well-being for faculty, staff, and students. This tool is the first instrument of its kind designed for use with the faculty, staff, and students, and hopefully will enable institutions to take a whole campus approach to well-being. And then we'll again get into some implications and discussions for the work. Before I get into that, I do want to acknowledge some of the funders and supporters of these projects that I'll be discussing. So Aetna, which is a CVS health company, is committed to providing individual students, healthcare professionals, producers, and others with innovative benefits, products, and services. At Aetna, they place the member at the center of everything that they do, and they support the health and well-being needs of their members and is paramount to their strategy. Additionally, the American College Health Foundation, connected to the American College Health Association, its mission is to promote, improve, and advance the health, well-being, and overall success of college students. And also, the ACHF will accomplish this mission by funding projects such as this, but funding sustainable college health initiatives and programs, including education, research, advocacy, and professional development in partnership with the American College Health Association and its members. All right, so I'm going to first jump into the first white paper, which is entitled Framing Wellbeing in a College Campus Setting. And I'll hopefully be able to provide the link to these papers if you have not seen them already. So maybe in the follow-up materials, Orlando, maybe we can include that for people if that is of interest to them. But this first paper had three sort of main sort of goals. The first was to develop an overview of the range of well-being initiatives currently offered at a variety of sample colleges and universities. So we used sort of a sample of different people and different institutions that were doing innovative things and did some focus groups with them to sort of understand the overview of their well-being initiatives. The second was to hopefully highlight some innovation. So in these conversations and through the research that we've done, maybe this would spur innovation and encourage exploration around evolving well-being strategies for promoting communities of care. The hope here was to broaden schools' field of vision and encompass various approaches to well-being. And third, this sort of culminated in a publication of a white paper, again, entitled Framing Wellbeing in a College Campus Setting, which I will give you some of the sort of key highlights from that time working over this, I believe it was about a 9 to 10 month exploratory study. So first, some context. Within this first paper, we went, like I said, into, and I'll get into some of the research methodology and kind of who we talked to and things of that nature, but we wanted to provide some context for at least some of the institutions to sort of build off of. So first, well-being. For the well-being, we wanted to sort of understand what that meant to each campus. So a couple of the research questions we had was, how does your campus define well-being? What initiatives do you have on your campus that promote student, faculty, and staff well-being? How were these initiatives developed? Describing any problems or obstacles, both institutional or individual, that get in the way of well-being. How does your department kind of work with others to improve well-being at a systems level? How would you describe your relationship between health equity and well-being? And then how are you measuring well-being? Those are sort of the prime drivers of the research questions. And to make sure we're all on the same page, we did provide some of these definitions you're seeing on the screen as a way for us to at least have a starting point, because as you'll find from our study is that there's a lot of different perspectives on this topic. But for well-being, we did use the CDC's definition and provide well-being. We said at minimum is the presence of positive emotions and moods, the absence of negative emotions, satisfaction with life, fulfillment, and positive functioning. We use that at least as a launching point to sort of have, again, solid foundation for what well-being meant, and then institutions could sort of tweak and say, what does that mean to them? When we asked about their well-being initiatives, we described that as a collections of programs, practices, policies designed to enhance individual and community well-being, not a singular or discrete program, practice, or policy. So a collection of these. What are you doing as a whole? You notice one of the questions was about health equity. So health equity, not healthy equity, sorry about that, is when everyone has the opportunity to be healthy as possible. So we provided that as sort of our standard definition, and then allowed institutions to sort of describe what that means to them and how they're accomplishing that. As well as health disparity, as differences in health outcomes and their causes among groups of people. Many health disparities are related to social determinants of health, the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. We, as a group, thought this was a super critical, important part to think about, and this study did happen even before the recent, not only the health pandemic, but the racial pandemic that we've been experiencing over the last 16, 18 months with COVID. So that gives you some context of sort of what are our research questions, as well as some of the context we provided for schools. In terms of the methodology and how this sort of paper came together, as I mentioned earlier, we did sort of reach out and we did use sort of a purposeful selection. So we had 10 institutions who participated in this research. Campuses were selected because of their innovative and their unique approach to well-being, and participants included a wide variety or spectrum of institutions, ranging from HBCUs to large state schools to all spread out across the country. So we did have a pretty good sort of selection of mixtures of all the different types you can think of in terms of institutional types. We did, as a research team, we had a research team that was comprised of 2 individuals, one with expertise in serving students, and the other was really instrumental in supporting faculty and staff well-being, so employee well-being. And again, this is not just a student perspective, but we wanted to see a whole campus approach. That research team had one person serve as a facilitator while the other one served as sort of a note taker. And they provided, they had interviews and focus groups with a variety of campus stakeholders at these 10 institutions. So the interviewees ranged from directors of health promotion and wellness, as well as leaders in human resources, benefits, and administration, as well as other people across the institution. Participants were overall enthusiastic about the project and sharing information on the various things that they were currently doing. And our research team, like I said, were sort of subject matter experts and practitioners on student and employee well-being on campuses. To give you a little bit more context on how we moved through this, we also had 3 types of institutions that we sort of bucketed these schools into based off what they were doing. So the 3 types of institutions, we had well-being initiatives were divided into either innovation or innovative schools who were doing things specifically just for students. We had another bucket of well-being initiatives that were for just employees. And then we had what we considered sort of hybrid models, people or institutions or offices who were supporting both faculty, staff, and student well-being, all within maybe one office or within one coordinated effort. So again, those interviews happened with key informants across. We did virtual interviews. We also did some focus groups with like students and also sort of the end user, if you will, of these well-being initiatives to gain their perspective on what it meant to them and how it enhanced or maybe didn't enhance their well-being based off of what the institution was trying to do. All right, in terms of some of the key takeaways, so you can see the actual paper there is listed on the left-hand side. That's what it looks like. Some of the key main takeaways we had. Some were not surprising. Some I think were sort of empowering for where we were headed, and some of the people on the research team were headed, but it was confirmed through our research. But first and foremost, there's no one definition, model, or measurement of well-being. We did use the CDC as something as a benchmark, but we did notice that we wanted to provide autonomy. We also noticed that college campuses and institutions were defining and creating different structures and different pathways for their own sense of well-being and what it meant for their different populations, knowing that it very much so varies across the institution and across various institutional types. So different schools use different definitions or potentially no definition at all. Additionally, each institution was at a different place in establishing their own language around well-being and or transitioning from wellness to well-being. We sort of noticed that as a theme. Wellness, I would say, sort of thematically seemed to be institutions were moving from that to well-being more as well-being as a process, kind of an ongoing process compared to a state or in one moment of time experiencing wellness. And I also think that the shift to well-being encompassed a more holistic approach compared to maybe wellness being associated more specifically maybe with like physical health or health-related content rather than a holistic and interconnected sort of definition. The second main takeaway was moving towards a systems approach to well-being. So many institutions were still primarily employing a health education strategy. I'm not sure if you resonate with that in terms of how you're thinking about the AOD work that's happening on your campus or the work that's happening on the campuses that I work at. But we really seem to have started as a field around education and empowerment. How do we create services and or education campaigns and or sort of foundational knowledge around health, wellness, AOD work? and strategies to hopefully enhance or prevent maybe high-risk behaviors. But what we are seeing is that there's been a shift more towards a systems approach. So innovative institutions are integrating practices and policies that work at a systems level and even beyond the walls of campus and into local communities. Another way to kind of put this that I've been sort of conceptualizing for myself is that maybe we have been focused or started out as education and empowerment, which is super critical and important and will always have a role within the work we're doing. But maybe we're shifting towards a focus on environment and equity. So instead of the first two E's being education and empowerment, we're focusing now on the environmental sort of policy level, systems level, as well as a focus on equity in our work. So that's sort of the shift that we sort of noticed and some of the things that I'm sort of deducing from my follow-up conversations and my own work on my campus here. And then last, the major theme was there's evolving efforts to better define and measure well-being. So a number of efforts were sort of beginning at a variety of the schools that we talked to either better define or start to define what well-being means, but also how to measure it, specifically in a way that it can speak to university administration. How can we measure the work that we're doing in ways that can actually drive maybe some of that systemic change and systemic work and environmental work that came out from the key finding of number 2. So these sort of include policy systems, physical spaces, as well as larger constructs such as resilience, thriving, and belonging. Those are the 3 main takeaways that came from the first paper, which really set foot for Aetna and the American College Health Foundation to really think about maybe there's a 2.0 version of this. Not only were these sort of the main findings, but we also found throughout some of our focus groups and from our interviews, the real emphasis or sort of uptick of emotional health and emotional well-being. And so there was a second paper that we are currently working on that is currently being entitled Measuring Emotional Well-Being, Taking a Whole Campus Approach, that wanted to sort of evolve from that first paper and think about how can we sort of not only just center emotional well-being, but also see how it connects to these larger constructs or these larger topics and things that we're doing on our campuses. And one of those in particular that I want to discuss today is alcohol and other drug type work. So the project goals for this second white paper, which I said we are still kind of currently underway. We just got our pilot results back, which I will talk about briefly, and we'll be writing up into a second white paper that will be forthcoming here in the next couple months. But the project goals for this measuring emotional well-being study was to test processes and procedures for institution-wide survey administration with faculty, staff, students on campus. It was to develop baseline cross-population data for participating campuses and in aggregate on the emotional well-being of faculty, staff, and students. And we also are sort of running statistical validation tests on our collected survey data to validate the tool that we came up with that can be used to broadly by higher education institutions in the future. We have a lot of really great research and assessment that was out there, but specifically as it pertains to well-being and this focus on not just the prevention of negative behaviors, but also the promotion of positive capacities and positive behaviors that we want to see. Maybe we could create a tool that could speak and kind of complement the picture of and tell the story of fully what's happening on campus as it relates to health, wellness, and well-being. So again, this study sought to build upon those findings from the first paper where emotional well-being was found to be a really key core construct within the cross-section of campuses selected to participate. This paper explores the phenomenon related to the inconsistent measurement of well-being initiatives across institutions of higher education. And in an effort to address this gap, the current study focuses on the development, implementation, and evaluation of a new survey focused on mental health and emotional well-being that was administered broadly to a cross-section of colleges and universities. Again, I want to highlight for this too, it's also still focused on faculty, staff, and students. So the whole campus, not just students, not just faculty, but really everyone. Similar to the past paper, we did want to sort of build in some context and sort of some definitions that we could sort of use as at least a starting block. But I will also sort of take a step back and notice that this current project we're under kind of has 6 main steps. The first was reviewing that first white paper, which I just talked about, and the need for something like this, or the desire, for something like this. The second was to develop our own working definition of emotional well-being based upon our literature review, as well as using sort of the CDC definition that we have up here. That is, as you can see, similar to the exact same definition we used in the prior paper, but sort of adding in a little bit, if I could, to this definition. The CDC describes well-being and emotional well-being as a state in which children and adults manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. Core competencies for emotional well-being include self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Emotional well-being considers the mental, emotional, and social aspects of a person's life that foster health by achieving a state of balance affected by both challenging and rewarding life events. So we really use that again as a baseline. We continue to look at the literature that was helping us in our first paper, but even evolve that for this particular study as our first two steps. So to review the literature and to use and come up with our own working definition of emotional well-being for the tool that we were creating. From there, our third step was to develop a conceptual model of emotional well-being that would guide our survey development. And based off those definitions, based off the literature review, we sort of landed on the sort of visual that you're seeing here. So emotional well-being for us kind of had a couple key latent variables or key sort of concepts that we wanted to sort of explore further that we thought were important in this survey development. Those included community and belonging, and the research that we have seen and hear about the importance of that as it relates to success and emotional health and well-being. We also wanted to have something in there related to coping and stress management, having the sort of the skills individually for ourselves that can allow us to sort of bounce back and bounce forward from those inherent challenges that are going to be a part of our lives, and especially in the college context. There's a lot of literature also on the importance of purpose and meaning. So we included that as a latent variable, as well as some of these new, not new, but just incorporating some of the well-being work that's been happening over the last, I would say, 20 years or so, including some subjective well-being scales. So again, sort of highlighting those positive capacities, those positive measures of health and well-being, as opposed to sometimes maybe the absence of negative things. So we came up with that sort of conceptual model based off our literature review. And the last bubble that you're seeing there is highlighting the importance of the environment. So how does the campus environment or the environmental factors support or not support emotional well-being? We wanted those 5 different core components to be a part of the study that we, or part of the survey tool that we were developing. So working from that conceptual definition, what we did is we then reviewed, sorry, I'm gonna go back here real quick. We then reviewed existing survey scales and items that were associated with this. So we went back to the literature to see what is being said about community and belonging, what is being said about coping stress management, and how are these things being measured. And we looked at those survey tools and tried to pull together and pull, instead of having them as disparate things, pulling them into one to create our own specific tool that can sort of help us maybe measure or have sort of an understanding or read potentially on what is going on related to emotional well-being on college campuses. So this slide that you're seeing that I jumped to and then back is just sort of building out from our conceptual model. So related to community and belonging, we found that social connectedness and belonging, there were scales and research around that. There's also things related to the importance of confidence, safety, and trust as it pertains to community and belonging. For coping and stress management, we have things in there such as resilience, flexibility, adaptability, as well as the presence or absence of things like anxiety. For purpose and meaning, just as it is, looked at things, there's scales that measure meaning in life, purpose in life, kind of going in that direction. And then for subjective well-being, similarly had some of the similar type topics here of resilience, stress management, flexibility, adaptability, anxiety, as well as meaning and purpose. We saw those to be sort of core themes from some of the subjective well-being tools that are out there. All right, so pulling that all together, we're kind of creating that conceptual model, pulling it all together after that review, we created a pilot survey of existing scales and items guided by the definition and the conceptual model of emotional well-being that we used. So here's a nice summary of sort of where we sort of landed based off of our research as a team. So for community and belonging, you can see the associated scales that we pulled from listed there. For coping and stress management, we use the well-being process. For purpose and meaning, we use the Claremont Purpose Scale. For subjective well-being, we pulled from the Diener Satisfaction with Life, as well as the Wake Forest Well-being Assessment. And then for that campus environment, we focused and pulled questions and tailored questions from Guarding Minds at Work tool. So this is sort of a summary of, based off all that research, where we pulled from and where we landed. And just to give you a sense of what some of these things look like, and this will be coming both, will kind of be shared a little bit more in both a summary white paper, but also a technical white paper. You can see some of the survey questions that we used just as an example of where we pulled from. So this is an example of some of the questions we pulled from the Diener Satisfaction with Life scale, which connected to our latent construct of subjective well-being and our subconstruct of life satisfaction and happiness. We use the scale as is, so there are no changes, whereas for other ones, we maybe changed the language to associate a little bit more with college or university settings, and or did not use the whole tool. We pulled specific questions based off of some of the latent concepts and variables that we were hopefully trying to get at. So here's an example, and then just another example of subjective well-being. Here's an example of sort of our subconstruct of depression and loneliness. So this was not only, we wanted to highlight not only the things that are positive, but also the absence maybe of negative behaviors and or symptoms such as depression, anxiety, things of that nature. So here's just an example of some of the things that we included for one of our sort of subsets of our pilot survey that we came up with. So then our step 6, after we created that pilot survey, we wanted to conduct a pilot administration. So we recently just did this, and it is sort of a weird year, so we are going to be doing this again. So if this is of interest to you, we could sort of look at this in the future. But just to give you some context of what will be coming in this forthcoming white paper from our initial pilot administration, there were still 6 institutions that self-selected into the study just because, think of COVID, it was really hard for some schools and just a lot going on. But it was also interesting to see some of the data associated with that. But 6 institutions, we had 3 Midwest, 1 New England, 1 Mid-Atlantic, and 1 from the Southwest. All 6 schools surveyed all of their population, so faculty, students, and staff on at least one of their campuses. We had just under 7,000 responses, so that gives us an average of just over 1,100 per school. And then something we just thought was interesting to include is that some schools surveyed multiple campus, i.e. their main campus in addition to maybe a law or health sciences campus. So we have sort of some of that data as well to think about a multi-campus system, which maybe you're coming from, or a collection of schools. As I said, we are still sort of running the data right now, so I don't have any major findings for you. But what I can say from our last meeting last week is that it is sort of highlighting the importance of our main finding from the past paper, which is the importance of environmental interventions and how important that is, and the importance of equity. So that those 2 E's, the education to empowerment, are critically important, but how do we also then shift it to the equity and environmental, the latter 2 E's, if you will. So that gives you sort of a rundown of 2 major projects that are happening nationally as it pertains to this evolving field of well-being. And I just wanted to sort of leave some time, if we could, for questions, but also to think about the discussion of implications for AOD work on campuses. So based off what I've shared, kind of what sticks out to you, how does this maybe connect or not connect to the work that you're doing, to the work and effort that I know has been happening for years and years for AOD to also shift to environmental interventions, things of that nature. So those are my reflections as sort of a general health education health practitioner, but I want to engage you all. What questions or what sticks out to you? And I might draw upon my wonderful moderator here to see if there are any things that are popping up either in the chat or in the questions box.
As James said, we have time for questions now, so we'll give it a few minutes.
What are you currently doing with your AOD work? And what gaps or opportunities exist from your perspective?
We have one question.
Yeah, shoot.
Can you elaborate more on how a health educator can start to make the shift to a more system approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And not a question that I have a here's the on a silver platter type answer. But I think it's important that we continue to ask that. What I will say is I think the move to also be able to show the data and to measure is really going to be critical. I would just speak from my experiences working on a couple campuses, is that the systems level work usually happens at the upper level administration, and we as health education, health promotion, wherever you're working, whatever you call it, have to be able to tell our story and tell our story in a compelling and enriching way. So can we connect our work, for instance, to some of the larger institutional priorities or strategic goals that are happening at the university, or things that we know that administrators are really worried about? So for instance, I can think of at my institution, we are a highly at the University of Denver, we are a highly tuition dependent institution. So butts in seats really does drive our operational success or our floundering. So as you can imagine, like many other schools, we have really struggled this past year because of the lack of students either entering into the higher education system or stepping away, or whatever the reasons may be. But I think for us as a health educator to really sort of shift that, we have to be able to tell our story. So that means backing it up with data that is complementary, additive to maybe whatever already is happening, but also speaks to the language of the ways in which decision makers who are maybe at the systems level are able to make the changes that we want to see. But I also think that it takes us as a field maybe a moment of reflection. I know for myself, I've been trained more at an individual level. How do I support individual students or an individual program as it pertains to a specific either topic, whether it be AOD, whether it be well-being, emotional health? That's how I've been trained. And for me, I have to I need to build upon that, but I also need to take a step back, maybe unlearn that a little bit and think from a more systems approach. I think it's challenging for us to do that, and it can be overwhelming. But I will also highlight maybe another strategy is to know that it's not just us. I believe that the work of health and well-being, in the same way that I believe the work of equity and inclusion should not just be a diversity, equity, inclusion office. It should be a collective approach. It should be everyone. In the same way that emotional or well-being as a whole construct is not just a health promotion office or a health center. It really takes us all to have these positive interactions that support belonging, that promote resilience, that promote adaptability, that promote the sense of inclusion that we know is really vital. But I also think it's a time for us to really look at policies and see if we can shift them. For instance, just one example that I know particularly related to this emotional well-being is like a first year forgiveness policy. The transition to college can be really tough, and often our grades can suffer maybe because we're not used to that campus environment. Some institutions employ sort of a first year forgiveness where in their first year they're able to sort of retake a class and update their grade. for that class. Say if they maybe don't do so well or fail one of those big science classes or STEM classes, or something that just it's whatever class it is that's been a struggle. But to implement policies and procedures like that that support an environment of well-being, I think are things that we can do as health educators and as offices to hopefully support these initiatives and some of the work that's sort of being highlighted in these two papers.
Okay, to follow up with that question, the same attendee asked, do you have any resources or a book recommendation to expand your view from an individual, group, community, or systems level?
Yeah. The couple things that are coming to mind right now, if you're not familiar with the Okanagan Charter, which is sort of hard to spell, I'm not sure if people are able to see my chat, but I'm going to put it in there.
I can send it.
Yeah, I think I spelled that right, but I was doing it quickly. The Okanagan Charter is the Canadian systems, I think, are way ahead of us in this and really sort of pushing the needle as it relates to environmental interventions. This is sort of the guiding framework or document that I think people are starting to ask these questions and at least kind of creating a vision and casting a vision for what we're doing. It's pretty short. It is an ambitious sort of roses, unicorns, butterflies type paper, but it allows us to start thinking and challenging us to think in more systems-based ways. That's the first thing that's coming to mind. I'll have to sort of come up with others and maybe send them along so they can be pushed out, but that would be the first. And as well as if you look in the first white paper, the literature review, it does have a variety of other documents that I think are foundational to be thinking about more of a systems-based approach. That are sort of guiding this shift that we're seeing.
Are you seeing any notable differences in how undergraduate students are defining and prioritizing well-being compared to institutional and public health definitions and priorities?
Can you read that again? I think I got it, but I want to make sure.
Okay. Are you seeing any notable differences in how undergraduate students are defining and prioritizing well-being compared to institutional and public health definitions and priorities?
It's a great question. That's going to get me pondering for the rest of the week. So thank you for that question. I think that the obvious difference is the added academic component and how we know academic persistence, stressors, those sorts of things, I think are some of the differences that are maybe contributing, or how maybe the college campus community defines well-being a little bit different than more of a health promotion or health sort of public health approach. But I think the similarities that I think maybe over this past year, at least for myself, but are just sort of crystallizing a little bit more, is the focus on health equity and environmental factors. I would say that maybe has been the sort of public health field has been focused on that more so, I think, starting out. But I think what we're seeing is that in higher education environments, we are sort of blending the sort of maybe the diversity, equity, and inclusion type offices and work with the well-being work, and we're seeing that they are very much so connected. I would just want to draw your attention, and this kind of answers maybe the other question that was asked before this. I think there's a lot of great work that's happening at Wake Forest University. As you noticed, there's the Wake Forest Wellbeing Assessment in this presentation that we're using for our pilot survey. But they're doing a lot of good work. I have a really good mentor who actually was sort of in charge of that office, and that office being sort of their well-being office, and has now transitioned over into a diversity, equity, inclusion. And I remember being like, congratulations on this like next step in your career. It's really exciting. And they said, it is a next step, but it's really an integration. It's really the same thing. I'm just sort of approaching it from a different way. So I'd say the public health maybe has focused and connected those ideas of health and health equity more so than maybe we have in the past. But I think higher education institutions are starting to talk about it or connect the dots more, where maybe they've been more disparate topics. And it's going to be continuing to be needed as we see the shifting needs as well as demographics of our institutions over the next couple of years, COVID or not. But I think COVID is only going to highlight more of these access and equity type issues, and how do we support, because access does not mean success in higher education. And so we need to sort of make sure that those are more tightly linked.
That seems to be all the questions for the day.
Awesome. Well, I'm just gonna put this up here. I'm gonna jump. That was our question slide. But I just wanted to sort of put up my information there if you have any follow-up questions or concerns, but also to draw your attention to the project website for some of these things that I've mentioned. It is listed here on the last slide. But just some highlights and information, as well as I think you're able to find some of the links and forthcoming links to some of the papers that we have. And I also just wanted to make a note and thank again not only ACHF and Aetna, but also sort of the project contributors, some of my colleagues, Ryan Travey at Babson, Andrew Wall, University of Redlands, Nicole Brocado at Wake Forest, Crystal Hutchinson at University of British Columbia, as well as a variety of staff, both at ACHA as well as Aetna. So thank you all for joining in this digital environment. I hope it was at least informational and at least got you thinking, and look forward to for more to come, both on the second study, but also we're gonna do another administration of that survey. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to check out that project website listed on the screen here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, James. And everyone, please keep an eye out for an email for GoToWebinar that will come about an hour after the program. The email will have a link for you to fill out as an evaluation. This evaluation will really help us with the planning for future events. Also, certificates will be issued within 7 to 10 business days from the webinar, and we will have the webinar available to view on the IHEC website. Thank you.
Thank you all.